Welcome to Insights. I'm Adam Rivers.
And I'm Sarah Collins. In this episode, we'll reflect carefully on the Qur'an verse by verse, focusing on wording, context, and coherence. And, over the course of our recent episodes, we've really been tracking this deeply unsettling psychological profile. We looked at those individuals who outwardly claim to be part of the faithful community, but, privately they steam in the shadows. We examined the profound disease festering in their hearts, their mockery of sincere people, and, well, their astonishingly arrogant claims that their corruption is actually a form of visionary reform. All of that really culminated in that truly haunting image we discussed last time, where the revelation describes them as being left by God to wander entirely blindly in their own transgressions, utterly lost, disoriented, yet completely convinced of their own genius.
Yeah, and that brings us directly to the revelation we're focusing on today, which really serves as the ultimate diagnosis for their condition. We are looking at the Qur'an, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 16. And the translation reads, "Those are the ones who have bought error in exchange for guidance, so their transaction has brought no profit, nor were they guided." So looking at this, a simple opening question about the context naturally arises, right? How exactly does a person reach a point where they're wandering so blindly, and what does it actually mean to buy a spiritual state?
Right. Well, before we get into the actual mechanics of buying and selling something invisible, I think we have to kind of bridge the gap between their outward behavior and this specific verse. We spent weeks analyzing the symptoms of their hypocrisy, the lies, the mockery, the two-faced interactions. But how does this verse act as a comprehensive summary of everything we've seen so far? I mean, what is the core disease behind all those symptoms?
Well, think about it like this. If you want to expose the root cause of an entire lifestyle of deception, what kind of terminology would you naturally use to summarize it?
I'd probably, I think I'd lean toward a medical analogy, like I'd call it a virus, or maybe a spreading infection that eventually takes over the host's brain. It feels like a sickness of the mind.
Right, and that makes logical sense, but the revelation takes a completely different route here. It doesn't use a medical framework at all. It uses an entirely economic one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this verse is a comprehensive summary that condenses the entire preceding scene of the hypocrites by revealing that their core disease was treating their spirituality as a transaction.
A transaction.
Exactly. They didn't view faith as a sacred covenant or a moral anchor or, a profound truth to submit to. Instead, they treated it as this cheap, modular commodity to be traded in the internal market of their own ego and desires.
Wow.
So their blind wandering isn't a random occurrence. It is the direct, calculated result of a prior economic choice they made within their own souls.
I want to push back on that slightly, just because, well, framing faith as a transaction feels so counterintuitive to how we usually think about religion, right? But when you apply it to human relationships, it actually suddenly clicks. It makes me think about the stark difference between, say, walking into a tense corporate negotiation room versus standing at an altar to sign a lifelong marriage covenant.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, because in a negotiation room, your entire psychological posture is totally defensive. You are looking for leverage, you're aggressively protecting your assets, and your eyes are constantly scanning for the exit clause in case the terms stop serving your immediate bottom line. It's entirely self-serving.
Right, it's all about what you can extract.
Exactly. But a true covenant like a healthy marriage is about radical surrender, vulnerability, and deliberately binding yourself to something greater than your own daily convenience. So if you treat faith like a corporate merger, you fundamentally corrupt the relationship from the very first handshake because you never actually intend to stay when things get difficult.
And the profound tragedy here is that the blind wandering they experience isn't just a punishment imposed from the outside. It's the natural consequence of constantly looking for that exit clause. They essentially engineer their own exile.
Wait, are you saying God didn't just arbitrarily cast them out into the dark? That they literally drafted the contract for their own spiritual exile and signed it themselves?
They absolutely signed it themselves. The wandering is the direct result of their own transactional worldview.
That is chilling.
Because when you treat the ultimate truth as something you can just bargain with, you lose the ability to see the truth clearly. Your vision becomes entirely obscured by your own relentless calculations. You end up blind because you've commodified the very light that was supposed to guide you.
Okay, if they're the ones who deliberately engineered this disaster, it makes me wonder about the specific wording the Qur'an uses to identify them. Why does the verse single them out so definitively, isolating them from the rest of humanity?
Well, imagine you have a massive, chaotic crowd, and you need to expose a highly sophisticated fraud operating right in the middle of it. How do you make sure everyone knows exactly who you are talking about?
You can't just throw out a vague description. You have to shine a massive, undeniable spotlight directly on them and separate them from the innocent people around them.
And that is the precise function of the Arabic word ulaika used at the very beginning of this verse, which translates to those.
Okay.
Grammatically, it's a demonstrative pronoun, specifically used to indicate distance. So the Quran is pulling back the curtain and definitively pointing at them.
Right.
After detailing all their scattered deceptive behaviors in the previous passages, the revelation gathers all those traits together, points a finger, and says, these specific individuals are the ones. It isolates them completely to ensure there is no ambiguity about who is responsible for this spiritual collapse.
You know that word, ulaika, it sounds incredibly familiar. Haven't we encountered it earlier in this exact same surah, but applied to a vastly different group of people?
We have, yes, and the contrast is totally deliberate. In the opening verses of Al-Baqarah, ulaika was actually used to describe the sincere, deeply grounded believers. The revelation stated, those are upon guidance, and those are the successful.
Oh, right.
So by reusing the exact same demonstrative pronoun here, the Qur'an is actively building two entirely opposing paradigms of human existence. You have one group that receives the divine guidance and thrives on it, and another group that takes that exact same guidance and actively trades it away for temporary gain.
Wow.
The word pointing to both groups is identical, but the existential realities they occupy couldn't be further apart.
I'm trying to visualize this distance you're talking about. The word implies those people over there, meaning they are far away. But historically, these hypocrites were physically sitting right next to the prophet and the sincere believers.
Like literally in the same room.
Yeah, they were in the same rooms listening to the same recitations. So how can the language physically point them out as being distant when they are, sitting in the front row?
Because the distance implied by ulaika in this context is entirely a moral and spiritual distance, not a geographical one.
Hold on, so the language itself is physically pointing them out as being exiled from the realm of safety, even while their physical bodies are blending in perfectly with the crowd.
Precisely. Their bodies are present, but their souls are light years away. They have removed themselves so far from the position of safety, sincerity, and peace that they can only be referred to from afar.
That is a terrifying image.
It's a state of total internal exile. They are strangers in the very community they claim to belong to, because their moral center of gravity is completely alienated from the truth being spoken right around them.
That is a deeply haunting concept, to be physically present in a place of profound truth, maybe even participating in the rituals, but morally existing in a completely different exiled dimension. It really forces us to ask about the specific mechanism of their exile. Like, what was the exact action they took to transport themselves so far away from safety?
Well, if you were to observe someone completely losing their way in life, like ruining their relationships, their career, their moral standing, what verbs would you naturally use to describe their downfall?
I think human nature usually leans toward language that softens the blow. We say things like, oh, he just slipped up, or she wandered down the wrong path, or they made a really tragic mistake during a moment of weakness. We usually imply some level of accident or ignorance,
Right, and the Quran aggressively rejects that soft language here. It does not say they slipped, stumbled, or made a fleeting mistake.
Okay.
It uses the precise calculated verb ishtarawu, which unequivocally translates to they bought.
They bought.
Yes. This is a devastating verb choice because buying is never a passive accident. You don't accidentally purchase a house or a car. Buying implies deliberate will, careful calculation, the weighing of a price tag against personal funds, and the deep, premeditated expectation of making a profit.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. No human being wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, I think I'd like to consciously purchase some moral error and spiritual blindness today. I mean, that defies basic psychological self-preservation. People rationalize their bad decisions. They don't explicitly shop for ruin.
Which is exactly why the word ishtarawu is so brilliantly exposing.
Right.
The hypocrite never views themselves as a villain shopping for falsehood.
Right.
They view themselves as incredibly smart, highly practical, and wonderfully flexible. They see a complex social situation. They weigh the costs of standing up for the truth versus the benefits of playing along with a lie, and they execute a transaction. They believe they are masterfully managing their varied interests, keeping all the powerful people happy, and securing their own social position from every possible angle. They don't see cowardice or deception, they see strategic networking.
It is terrifying how easily that translates to modern life. How often do we justify our own ethical compromises by slapping a sanitized label on them? We call it networking, or being a team player, or just being practical in a tough economy.
Exactly.
We rebrand our moral cowardice as adaptability, completely missing the fact that we are actually initiating a disastrous transaction. We think we are playing the game, but we are actually the ones being played, selling off pieces of our integrity at a really steep discount.
And the moment we sanitize that betrayal, we begin to cultivate the exact mindset the verse is critiquing.
Right. So if someone is constantly engaging in these microtransactions, rebranding their compromises as shrewd business, what happens to their overarching mindset? What does it do to a person's psyche when they spend all their time in a literal or even figurative marketplace?
Well, what dictates the value of an item in a marketplace? Is it an inherent sacred worth, or is it something else entirely?
In a market, nothing has inherent worth. The value of an item is entirely dictated by supply, demand, and whoever has the most leverage at that exact second. Like, a bottle of water is $1 at a grocery store and $10 at a music festival. The value fluctuates based purely on the environment.
Exactly. The Quran deliberately employs this marketplace terminology because the absolute core characteristic of hypocrisy is possessing a commercial heart.
A commercial heart.
Right. Their internal value system operates exactly like a stock exchange. They treat profound moral stances, ethics, and even the concept of truth itself as highly negotiable goods.
Wow.
If adopting a certain moral posture happens to be beneficial to their social standing, their career, or their wallet today, they will champion it loudly. But the very moment that same truth costs them anything, the moment it demands actual sacrifice or threatens their comfort, they immediately dump the stock and abandon the truth.
It's the ultimate form of ideological grifting. It reminds me of the most cynical kind of modern politician, the kind who has absolutely no core convictions. They just adopt whatever talking points will win over the specific demographic they are standing in front of at that exact hour.
Spar on.
Their values are treated like cheap, disposable commodities worn for 60 minutes to secure a round of applause, and then casually tossed into the trash before they walk into the next room to tell a different group the exact opposite. Religion, morality, justice, they are all just corridors to walk through or tools to wield. They are never true, binding destinations.
And the profound realization the revelation is forcing upon us here is that the ultimate danger to the human soul is not making a one-off mistake out of human frailty. The true existential danger is taking the absolute truth itself and placing it on an auction block to see who will bid the highest for your loyalty.
Wait, let's pause and unpack that because the implications are massive. So the ultimate sin being described isn't a moment of weakness, lust, or anger, but the cold, calculated act of turning the absolute truth into something you are willing to bargain over.
That is precisely the root of the disease. A person who falls into error out of sheer weakness still maintains a deep respect for the truth. They simply fail to live up to it in a difficult moment, and they usually feel remorse.
Yeah, they know they messed up.
Exactly. But the person who bargains with the truth has fundamentally stripped the truth of its sovereign authority. They have internally decided that their ego is the master, and the truth is just a subordinate servant to be bought, sold, and manipulated according to their daily whims.
Okay, if they are engaging in this massive, arrogant transaction, what exactly are they using as currency? Because in any transaction, you have to give up something of actual, tangible value to get what you want. You can't buy something with an empty wallet. What was the most valuable thing these individuals possessed?
Think about the specific environment they were in historically. What was the single most precious resource available to them? Something people had traveled across deserts and risked their lives to find.
The revelation itself. The divine guidance that was literally being spoken right in their presence. They had direct access to the truth.
And that is exactly what the Qur'an states they used as their currency. It uses the phrase bil huda, which means with guidance or for guidance.
Okay.
The specific preposition used here, the Arabic letter ba, legally indicates the price that was paid in an exchange. The staggering tragedy here is that guidance wasn't some distant mystical treasure they tried desperately to find but couldn't. It wasn't hidden from them.
It was there.
It was literally right there in their hands. And instead of holding onto it as a desperate lifeline, they marched into the market and used it as cold, hard currency to purchase error.
The visual of that is agonizing. It's like imagining someone holding a guaranteed, life-changing, winning lottery ticket, something that would secure their family's peace and safety forever. And instead of simply cashing it in, they purposefully walk up to a street vendor, hand over the winning ticket, and ask for a handful of dirt in return.
That's exactly it.
They willingly squander the ultimate, irreplaceable opportunity for something entirely worthless simply because they liked the immediate texture of the dirt.
They actively blew out a blazing light that they already possessed, just so they could purchase a specific type of darkness that better accommodated their worldly calculations, their social fears, and their temporary desires.
Hearing it framed like that, it makes me think back to the very first time guidance was mentioned in the Qur'an. How does this transactional mindset relate to the people introduced in the opening lines of this surah, who were described so differently?
Well, if the Quran introduces itself in its opening lines as a guide for the mindful, for those who possess a deep, reverent awareness of reality and their place in it, what happens to individuals who are mindful only of their own social standing, their bank accounts, and their immediate worldly gains?
They entirely miss the function of the revelation. They are holding a map, but they are only using it to fan themselves, or maybe to look like an explorer to their friends, rather than actually using it to navigate out of the wilderness.
Right, and this connects directly back to that opening premise, guidance for the mindful. The terrifying danger of the hypocrite is their sheer physical and intellectual proximity to the revelation.
Oh, wow.
These are not distant strangers who has never heard of the faith. They hear the verses regularly, they understand the deep theology, and they are incredibly fluent in this specialized language of the community. But their fatal structural flaw is that they completely refuse to let that external knowledge become internal transformative guidance.
So they keep it strictly on the surface. It's an aesthetic choice, an accessory to their persona, not a transformative power that actually challenges their ego.
Exactly. Instead of allowing the truth to dismantle their ego, they use their proximity to the truth as social capital to secure their status among the believers. They desperately want all the communal perks of being associated with the truth, the trust, the network, the safety, without paying the heavy internal price of submitting to its actual demands.
Right.
The stark, terrifying lesson here is that mere physical or intellectual proximity to revelation absolutely does not equal being a guided person.
This poses such a crucial question about how we view religious authority and knowledge today. It implies that it is entirely possible for someone to be a renowned expert in religious language, flawless in their academic theology, capable of delivering moving speeches, and yet remain entirely morally bankrupt internally. It shows that you can completely master the vocabulary of the truth without ever once letting the truth master you.
And by mastering that vocabulary for selfish reasons, they essentially weaponize their very closeness to the faith in order to build an impenetrable shield around their own worldly safety and comfort.
Wait, are you saying their deep knowledge of the faith didn't just fail to save them, but actually made their deception infinitely worse? That their proximity was a tool for deeper betrayal?
Absolutely. A person who is genuinely ignorant and strays off the path is just lost. They can be taught and brought back. But a person who intimately knows the truth, deeply understands its profound value, and still consciously uses it merely to manipulate others for personal gain has committed a far deeper spiritual treason.
That is devastating.
Their deep knowledge provided them the sophisticated camouflage they needed to execute their dark transactions flawlessly without being detected by the community.
That brings us to the specific words used for what was bought and what was sold in this devastating trade. I really want to look closely at the scale of this transaction.
Okay, notice how the Quran doesn't say they bought a mistake or a small error in judgment. Based on the Arabic phrasing, what is the actual scale of what they traded away and what did they receive in return?
Well, it doesn't sound like a minor infraction. It sounds like they didn't just trade one small good deed for one small bad deed. They traded the absolute entirety of guidance for the absolute entirety of error.
The grammar confirms your exact intuition. This is highlighted by the definiteness of the Arabic words used. Adalata, meaning the error, and al-huda, meaning the guidance.
Okay, the makes it definite.
Exactly. By using the definite article for both words, the Quran is actively telling us this is not a petty comparison between a small slip of the tongue and a minor charitable act. It is the complete, wholesale substitution of one entire existential path and worldview for another.
It's a total paradigm shift. They aren't just rearranging the furniture, they are burning down the house and moving into a cave.
Guidance, in the Quranic worldview, is a comprehensive, illuminated path equipped with a reliable internal compass and profound existential meaning. Error is not just walking slightly off-center while generally heading in the right direction. It is losing the concept of a compass entirely.
Wow.
It is stepping completely off the map, severing ties with reality, which inevitably leads to the total blind wandering that was described in the previous verse. You cannot navigate a complex life if you've intentionally sold your only compass.
It's like being a driver on a massive, well-lit highway that leads straight to a safe destination. You aren't just slightly swerving in your lane because you're a bit tired or distracted. You are actively grabbing the steering wheel, yanking it violently to the side, breaking through the guardrails, exiting the highway of meaning altogether, and driving your car completely into the dark, uncharted, dangerous wilderness.
And the most chilling part is, you are doing it on purpose. And recognizing that deliberate, forceful nature of their action forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable psychological question. How can a rational human brain possibly justify making such a demonstrably, objectively terrible trade?
It makes me wonder about adaptation. Like, what happens to your physical senses when you've been sitting in a pitch-dark room for days on end? Eventually, your eyes adjust to the darkness, and you start to actually convince yourself that the dim shapes you see are daylight.
Right, your entire perception of reality becomes completely inverted. You lose the baseline for what light actually is. And that is exactly what this verse describes regarding their spiritual state.
Yeah.
A total, terrifying inversion of the internal scale of values.
An inverted scale.
Yes. A rational, spiritually healthy person naturally buys guidance in order to escape error. It's the most basic spiritual instinct of seeking safety. But these individuals did the exact opposite, which exposes a state of deep, systemic internal corruption that goes all the way down to their core.
So they didn't just misunderstand salvation. They actually looked at salvation and perceived it as a genuine threat to their well-being.
Exactly. They view spiritual salvation, moral clarity, and absolute truth as a tangible loss, a dangerous liability that will inevitably cost them lucrative business deals, social standing, or powerful friends.
Right.
Conversely, they look at moral wandering, deception, ambiguity, and manipulation and view them as a massive practical benefit. In their thoroughly inverted world, honesty is an unacceptable, foolish risk, while hypocrisy is celebrated as street smarts, shrewdness, and high-level strategy.
I think anyone listening to this can instantly recognize this dynamic because it is everywhere in modern society. Think about certain toxic corporate environments or highly competitive political circles. The person who insists on simple, transparent honesty is openly mocked as hopelessly naive, childish, or a liability to the team.
Oh, absolutely.
Meanwhile, the highly manipulative sociopath who plays everyone against each other, who lies with a smile, is praised as a strategic genius and promoted to leadership. Modern society frequently, actively rewards the exact inverted scale that this ancient verse is warning us about.
And this inversion of values, where society or the individual calls the bad good and the good bad, is the ultimate undeniable sign of a thoroughly corrupted heart. It is the moment when a person actively, vigorously chooses against their own true, eternal self-interest, all while genuinely, deeply believing they are winning at life.
I have to stop and make sure I fully grasp this. So their internal moral compass isn't just slightly broken or in need of minor calibration. It is actually pointing dead south toward a cliff, and they are sprinting in that direction at full speed, completely and utterly convinced they are heading north toward safety.
It is a fatal terminal disorientation disguised as absolute arrogant certainty. They aren't just confused wanderers asking for directions. They are confidently, aggressively wrong. And that is arguably the most dangerous, unreachable state a human being can possibly exist in.
If they are operating with this level of arrogant confidence in their marketplace strategy, what is the final objective outcome of this terrible deal they struck? Does the universe reward their street smarts?
Well, think about it. If you enter into a complex deal solely and exclusively with the ruthless motive of making a massive profit, completely ignoring all ethics, collateral damage, and truth, what is the ultimate, most fitting poetic justice you could possibly face?
The ultimate poetic justice would be to lose the profit completely, to scheme and betray everyone, only to walk away with absolutely nothing, realizing you compromised your soul for a payout that never arrived.
And that is precisely the definitive verdict delivered in the next phrase of the verse. Fama rabehat, which translates to, so it did not profit. The Arabic letter A, meaning so, is crucial here. It immediately and inextricably links their calculated, deceitful transaction directly to its catastrophic failure. The consequence doesn't lag. It is baked into the very DNA of the action. God entirely denies them any profit, because profit, in the cheapest, most worldly sense, was their one and only motive for entering the realm of faith to begin with.
Right. They didn't care about the truth of the divine message. They didn't care about justice or community. They only cared about what the message could yield for their personal brand.
They desperately wanted the social gains, the physical security, and the prestige of being associated with the believers. But the tragedy is deeply compounded here. Not only did they completely fail to secure the worldly profit they schemed so hard for, but they also permanently lost their starting capital, the guidance itself.
Ouch.
They walked into the market holding the greatest treasure in existence, and they walked out utterly empty-handed, bankrupt in every possible dimension of reality.
It makes me picture a staggeringly arrogant day trader on Wall Street. Someone who takes their entire life savings, the deed to their family home, the college funds for their kids, everything of actual foundational value, and wagers it all on a guaranteed, highly illegal, shady scam because they genuinely think they are smarter than the market.
That's a perfect analogy.
In the end, the scam inevitably collapses. They don't just lose the massive, greedy payout they were dreaming of. They lose their original home. They end up on the street having outsmarted no one but themselves.
That captures the sheer, unmitigated totality of their loss perfectly. To fully appreciate how devastating this is, we have to look back. How does this catastrophic outcome compare to the believers we discussed in the earlier episodes?
It begs the question, what is the true Quranic definition of enduring wealth versus absolute bankruptcy? Like, how does the revelation measure a successful life?
The Qur'an masterfully sets up a stark contrast between two entirely different economies of human existence: the economy of faith and the economy of hypocrisy. Earlier in the surah, the true, sincere believers are explicitly described as muflihun, which means the successful, the prosperous, or the ones who truly thrive.
Okay.
Why were they given this title? Because they took whatever limited capital they had in this life, their time, their wealth, their desires, their intellect, and invested it heavily with full trust into the guidance.
So their investment, while maybe costly in the short term, yields eternal guaranteed returns. They actually secure the profit the hypocrites were trying to steal.
Precisely. But the hypocrites, operating entirely in their dark, self-serving economy, face absolute zero profit.
Okay.
The Qur'an presents this fascinating overarching paradigm where human beings are viewed as constantly trading. We are all merchants. We are always standing at the register. We spend our lives, our minutes, our emotional energy, and our choices every single day. The profound question the revelation asks us isn't whether we are trading, because our existence demands that we spend our time, but rather, with whom are we trading? And what do we actually consider to be true profit?
It's a profoundly challenging lens through which to view our daily lives. I mean, you listening, does modern society's definition of success align more with the economy of faith, which frequently demands difficult sacrifices, uncomfortable honesty, and delaying immediate gratification for the sake of ultimate truth? Or does it align perfectly with the economy of hypocrisy, which actively rewards cutting corners, shifting shapes, exploiting others, and selling out for immediate validation? I think we all know which economy our current culture worships, and it makes this verse incredibly relevant.
And this brings up a devastating irony about the people the verse is exposing. The hypocrites' vaunted flexibility, their celebrated ability to seamlessly change their moral shape to fit comfortably into any container or social group, is actually defined by the Qur'an as total moral bankruptcy.
Wait, let me make sure I'm connecting this. So the very trait they take the absolute most pride in, their smooth adaptability, their PR skills, their talent for playing all sides of an issue without actually committing, is exactly the trait that fundamentally ruins them.
Yes, they think their fluidity is their greatest asset, their ultimate superpower in a complex world, but the Qur'an exposes it as a complete, fatal lack of substance. You cannot build a lasting foundation on something that constantly changes shape. They are bankrupt because, in their endless effort to be everything to everyone, they have no solid, authentic core left to invest.
Let's shift our focus to the word trade itself in this context, because I think there's more to unpack about the scope of their actions.
When the verse discusses their trade, is it describing just one isolated, regrettable moment at a spiritual cash register? Or is it describing an entire, comprehensive business model for a human life?
Well, the way it's described, it doesn't sound like a one-off mistake. It sounds completely systemic. It sounds like an entire corporate strategy applied to a person's soul.
That is exactly what the Arabic word tijartuum implies. It translates directly to their trade, or their commerce, as an ongoing noun.
Ongoing.
The ultimate failure highlighted here is attributed to their entire overarching system of trade, not just one bad deal made on a Tuesday afternoon. It reveals a whole, meticulously calculated life project that is built entirely on chasing fluctuating worldly gains, rather than anchoring oneself to fixed, objective truth.
So it means absolutely everything is on the table for them. Nothing is sacred, nothing is protected from the market.
Nothing is protected. They view absolutely everything. Their profound loyalty to friends, their basic honesty, their sense of justice, their religious affiliations, and even their own self-image and dignity, as highly negotiable commodities permanently up for sale if the price is right. It's a holistic methodology of living where nothing is anchored and everything has a price tag.
It makes you think of someone whose entire identity violently shifts depending on which friend group they're standing with or what the current trending topic is on social media. They curate entirely different personalities, vocabularies, and moral outrage for different audiences until, eventually, if you peel back all those layers of heavy curation, there is no solid, authentic core left underneath. They've traded away their actual self, piece by piece, for a cheap collection of crowd-pleasing masks.
And that terrifying reality of having no core left brings us to a crucial, practical realization. How does this ancient description of a desert marketplace apply directly to the mechanics of our lives today?
Right. Do we really need to be living centuries ago, haggling in an ancient bazaar, to fall into this exact same psychological and spiritual trap?
Not at all. This verse serves as a perfectly polished, highly uncomfortable mirror for the contemporary reader. We might not utter the exact same historical phrases the hypocrite said back then, but we are dangerously, constantly capable of replicating their exact internal actions in our modern context.
The mechanics of the trade remain exactly the same, even if the currency looks a little different today.
Exactly. We might use our deep knowledge of Revelation simply to gain social prestige in our local community, wanting to be seen as the wise elder or the smart intellectual. We might quietly, subtly compromise our core morals just to keep a lucrative job or avoid a difficult conversation with a wealthy client.
Yeah.
We might hide our faith entirely just to seamlessly fit into a secular progressive crowd. Every single time we do this, we are pulling out that divine currency. We are actively paying with our internal guidance in order to buy a few fleeting moments of temporary hollow safety.
I want you, the listener, to really reflect on this directly because it's uncomfortable but so necessary. What specific piece of your internal clarity or your hard-won moral courage have you quietly traded away recently just to keep the peace in a toxic family or work environment? What truth did you swallow and suppress because speaking it out loud would have cost you social capital or an invitation to the right party?
And the most dangerous, insidious part of this ongoing quiet trade isn't necessarily the cheap validation you buy. It's the profound, irreplaceable light you lose while patting yourself on the back, falsely thinking you've successfully survived the situation.
Wait, this is the cognitive dissonance again. We actually think we've won because we successfully avoided a conflict or secured a promotion, completely blind to the terrifying fact that we just sold our soul at a steep discount.
The psychological toll of this victory is immense. Because yes, you survive the immediate social moment and the crowd applauds you. But internally, you slowly, methodically assassinate your own conscience. You become a hollow shell, filled only with the exhausting anxiety of maintaining the charade.
With that heavy psychological toll in mind, what is the final definitive judgment pronounced on these individuals by the revelation?
Well, think about the trajectory of a life lived entirely as a performance. If you spend your whole entire life meticulously acting like you know the way, loudly giving directions to everyone else, what actually happens when the road inevitably gets dark and the performance has to end?
When the performative lights go out and the crowd goes home, you realize you are entirely alone and you have absolutely no idea where you are.
And that realization leads to the devastating final phrase of the verse, "Wama kanu muhtadin," which translates to, "and they were not guided."
Wow.
This is the deepest, most foundational layer of truth exposed in the verse. It wasn't just that they made a bad trade at the end of the day. The truly terrifying reality is that they never truly internalized the guidance to begin with. It was never inside them.
So it was always, from day one, an external performance. The truth never once penetrated their chest.
The Qur'an makes a huge, vital, linguistic, and spiritual distinction between having guidance physically around you, which is the word huda, and actually becoming a guided person internally, which is the word muhtadi.
Huda versus muhtadi.
Right. These individuals possess the huda, The light of revelation was shining right on their faces, but they treated that light merely as a convenient desk lamp to read their financial ledgers, not as a sovereign, divine authority to submit their lives to. Because they refused to submit, they never made the transition to becoming muhtadi.
It's exactly like someone who buys an incredibly expensive, highly accurate compass. They keep it in their front pocket, they show it off at parties, and they love looking like an authentic explorer to all their friends. But when they're actually out in the woods, they absolutely refuse to ever follow where the needle points because they think they know a faster shortcut. They possess the ultimate tool of guidance, but they remain hopelessly lost in the woods because they lack the fundamental humility to submit to its direction.
That analogy perfectly sets up the next point. Notice the fascinating, brilliant shift in the linguistic metaphors the Quran uses within the span of this single verse.
If you start a journey haggling over prices in a crowded, noisy marketplace, where do you usually end up when the market closes and you have to head back?
You eventually have to leave the market and walk a path to get home. And that highlights the brilliant linguistic shift here. The verse intentionally starts with heavy, calculated market imagery, words like bought, trade, and profit. But it ends decisively with travel and path imagery, guided or finding the way.
Oh, it moves seamlessly from economics to navigation.
And this demonstrates a total dual collapse of their human existence. They are entirely bankrupt in the marketplace of values, having lost all their capital, and simultaneously they are utterly, hopelessly lost on the journey of life, having broken their compass. They ruin their internal standard of what constitutes profit, and in doing so, they completely shattered their directional compass.
It is a truly terrifying existential thought to lose your map of reality and your sense of intrinsic value at the exact same time. It's not just having a bad day at the office, it's a complete existential collapse. You have nothing left to orient you and nothing left inside you to value.
And it's crucial to point out here that a person who only loses their way on the path can still be saved as long as their internal compass of desire still genuinely wants the truth. But a person whose compass and whose core desires are fundamentally systematically broken is in the ultimate, most critical danger imaginable.
Let me make sure I understand the depth of that danger. Are you saying they are beyond saving because they don't even want to be found anymore? Have they actually convinced themselves that the dark wilderness is their true home?
Exactly. If you are lost in the woods, but you know you are lost, you will frantically look for a light, and when you see it, you will run toward it. But if you have intentionally traded the light away because you prefer the dark, and you've spent years convincing yourself and everyone around you that the dark is actually the new light who can possibly guide you, you will run away from the rescue party. That is the internal, inescapable tragedy they have engineered for themselves.
How can we, living our normal daily lives, actively safeguard ourselves from making this exact same, incredibly subtle error?
To protect ourselves, we have to constantly interrogate our daily actions and ask ourselves, what is the invisible currency you're spending every single day without even realizing it?
We are all merchants in our own lives, whether we want to admit it or not.
We are. This verse is not just historical commentary about a group of people long dead. It is an urgent, universal warning directed at the reader. Every single one of us is constantly buying and selling with our limited time on earth, our physical effort, and our core identity. The terrifying, pressing question this verse forces upon us is, can a human being actually sell their own divine guidance?
And the sobering, undeniable answer is yes.
Yes, easily, and we do it in increments. When you choose to stay entirely silent on a clear, undeniable injustice, purely for the sake of your own career safety or social comfort, you are standing at the register.
Wow.
When you tell a calculated, strategic lie to gain a slight social advantage over a peer, you are at the register. When you replace genuine sincerity with smooth, charming manipulation, you are actively spending your internal guidance to buy a small piece of error.
It makes you really reflect on the daily microtransactions of our lives, those small, seemingly insignificant moments where we just nod along to a conversation we know is morally wrong, or laugh at a joke that degrades someone, simply to avoid being the odd one out. We think it's just harmless politeness, or surviving the workday, but this verse is telling us it's actually a spiritual transaction where we are slowly, quietly bleeding out our internal light drop by drop.
And are the consequences of these daily, quiet trades only felt in some distant, abstract afterlife, or is there an immediate cost?
Does a person who constantly lies to themselves, who wears a different mask for every single interaction every day, actually feel any real grounding peace right now in the present moment?
They absolutely don't, and that is why the denied prophet mentioned in the verse isn't exclusively a theological afterlife concept.
Hmm.
The worldly loss is immediate, and it is devastatingly psychological. A human heart that gets used to constantly trading the truth slowly inevitably loses its inner unity.
Right.
It fragments, it loses its basic self-respect, and it completely loses its tranquility.
The internal fragmentation must be exhausting to maintain.
It is paralyzing. Life devolves into a complex, draining web of maintaining different masks for different audiences. You have to constantly remember which specific lie you told to which specific person. This is a profound form of error and blindness that doesn't politely wait for Judgment Day. It starts eating away at a person's humanity, their peace of mind, and their basic sanity right now in this life.
It's like imposter syndrome, taken to a severe, terminal, moral extreme. You have worn so many different masks, agreed with so many conflicting opinions to please so many different crowds, that when you finally go home, shut the door, and stand alone in front of a mirror, you genuinely no longer know what your original face looks like. The real you has been traded away in 1,000 tiny pieces, and there is nothing left.
And the ultimate punishment for this level of hypocrisy often isn't dramatic lightning striking from the sky. It is the total, quiet, terrifying loss of the ability to ever be alone with oneself without needing a mask to hide behind.
So the punishment isn't just external fire and brimstone. It is literally the crushing psychological exhaustion of their own making. They become their own inescapable prison.
Exactly. They meticulously built the labyrinth of lies, and now they are condemned to live in it. The sheer emotional energy required to maintain a purely transactional life where nothing is true is completely unsustainable for the human soul. It hollows you out from the inside.
As we look at the overarching lesson of this massive spiritual collapse, what does this teach us about our fundamental daily relationship with revelation?
Well, it asks the most piercing, uncomfortable question possible for a believer. When you physically open the Qur'an, what are you actually looking for? What is your true hidden intent?
Are you looking for a mirror to expose your flaws, or are you looking for a weapon to attack others and defend your ego?
That captures the danger perfectly. The core existential threat identified here is developing a utilitarian relationship with the Quran. The absolute danger is approaching the sacred verses, not with a humble heart eager to be led and corrected by them, but with a scheming mind looking to use them for an agenda.
Using the divine as a tool for the ego.
Yes. Speaking the language of faith simply because it's highly useful in a certain social context or because it elevates your status as a moral authority among believers is the widest, most deceptive door to spiritual ruin. Because this specific type of error isn't obvious to the crowd, it comes perfectly disguised as shining righteousness.
It's the ultimate airtight self-deception. It forces every single one of us to pause and ask ourselves, do we read Revelation to genuinely allow it to challenge our biases and change our minds, or do we read it just to frantically search for isolated quotes that support what we have already stubbornly decided we want to do? Are we sincerely seeking guidance, or are we just seeking a divine endorsement for our own selfish desires?
To bring all of these profound, intricate layers, the economics, the psychology, the spiritual exile together into one final stark picture, how would we do that?
If you had to summarize the ultimate tragedy of this specific group in one single defining scene, what does that scene look like?
The scene is one of unfathomable self-inflicted tragedy. The ultimate life-saving guidance was right there, within arm's reach. They didn't have to cross treacherous oceans or climb mountains to find it.
Right.
But instead of falling to their knees in gratitude and accepting it as a desperate lifeline, they picked it up, took it straight to the noisy, chaotic market, and traded it for cheap, fleeting, worldly desires.
They sold the eternal for the temporary.
And in doing so, they lost absolutely everything. They botched the economic deal, they lost the spiritual path, and they forfeited the absolute truth. The Qur'an draws a blindingly stark, uncompromising line in the sand here. You either humbly receive the guidance and truly succeed, or you arrogantly trade it away and go entirely permanently bankrupt. There is absolutely no middle ground, no safe neutrality where you can play both sides.
It is such a stark, uncompromising reality. It brings us back to the sobering realization that every single interaction we have with the truth is active. It is either a deliberate step toward it, allowing it to guide us, or it is a calculated transaction away from it, selling it off for comfort. Thank you for breaking down such a profound reality for us. We've seen how treating faith as a transaction fundamentally corrupts the human heart. We've learned that physical and intellectual proximity to truth isn't enough if you're secretly willing to trade it away. And we've realized that the greatest possible loss is sacrificing our moral core for temporary worldly gains, resulting in an exhausting labyrinth of our own making. As you go about your day, consider this. When the performative lights of your social circles go out and you are left entirely alone with your own thoughts, does the face you see in the mirror belong to someone who stands for something real, or is it just a collection of the masks you've worn to survive the market? Thank you for listening to Insights. That's it for this episode of Insights. If you found this reflection helpful, follow the show and join us next time as we continue verse by verse in the Qur'an. Until then, take one idea from this verse into your day.